Okay, welcome back to the speeder bike build. It has been way too long since I posted a video on this, so I'm really anxious to get back on it, and waiting right there very patiently is the Jaguar. That'll be next after I get some more done on this, so if you've been following that build, be patient, we'll be back on that at some point. What I think I want to do next here is I want to focus on this piece here, which goes onto the end of that. So I got to find some aluminum and figure out how to mill that shape into it. Yeah, let me find some material, and then I'll get back with you and show you how that goes. All right, so that boring head did not like being plunged right into the material. I thought it could have handled it better than that. Maybe I just need to introduce the cutter to the bench grinder. But it did what I was after. It left a detail here, trying to simulate the detail in the part there. Obviously, there's a few more pieces I need to add. I have an idea on what to do here for the detail that's there. I'll do that later. For now, though, if you take a look at this, it does have a bend. It bends up this way, then bends back down this way, and then that surface gets filed down to thin up that edge. So I need to put a couple of bends in it, and I would be willing to bet that right now that will not like being bent. So I'm going to anneal it, and the way I've done it before, that I learned from YouTube. I've seen countless people do this, so who knows who actually figured it out. But I've learned it on YouTube. I've done it several times. It works perfectly well. I know there's already Sharpie on that, but I'm going to do it again. So it needs to get bent here, and it needs to get bent along here. And so to anneal aluminum, you can either use soot from a sooty acetylene flame, or you can use, as I'm using here, some Sharpie marker. And then what you do is you heat it up with a torch until the Sharpie marker or the soot is completely burned off and gone. And now you know it's at the right temperature to bend it. So I'm going to put this in a vise, put a torch on it till the Sharpie mark goes away, and then try and figure out how to bend it. Kind of a weird angle. I probably should have turned the vise sideways so I could see both sides better, easier. But I'm going to call that good enough. The Sharpie is pretty much all gone. So what I'm going to do is just let that cool down on its own. Turn that off. And we'll just let that cool down and come back to it later and see how it bends. Like I said, I just want a gradual lean, and hopefully this will be enough. Okay, so I went to my biggest hammer I have in the shop here, and a bucking bar against that, and weld on it pretty hard, and I only got a little bit. Good thing I annealed it. It's not quite as much as I was wanting, but I think that's going to be enough. All right, so that's the other way. I just hammered it that way. I didn't record it because I just put it in and did it, and I needed both hands. But just a few hard blows here. So it's kind of leaning back that way. So it's got a little bit of that. It's probably not even going to be noticeable. I probably just spent 10 minutes of my life that nobody's ever even going to realize I did. But yeah, that's how it goes sometimes. So I'm just going to pop that off and file and sand and get that to shape. But let me show you real quick here. My plan for making this detail on the other side. So that's the detail here, which obviously I need to make a couple more pieces to bolt on. But that detail right there, which is just a couple of raised little pieces, that'll go on here. Let me show you how I'm going to do that. You'll notice on the milling machine, I have my vise, rotary table, and a 3-jaw chuck. In the 3-jaw chuck, I have a scrap piece of aluminum. I previously turned that down in my lathe and faced off the end, and then glued on a piece of copper, and then faced that off and trued it up in the lathe. Now it's in the mill, and so now what I plan on doing is coming in about here and then milling down. I think that's a 3 millimeter. That might not be 3. I want to go in about half the thickness and plunge in, and then turn that around and mill around. Basically mill out everything that's not in black Sharpie. And that is just very roughly drawn black Sharpie. There is nothing here that is dimensionally critical, but I just want to mill away everything that's not black Sharpie, and then that will make that circular detail that will then get bonded onto that aluminum piece. This is not as nice as I was hoping for. It's better than I expected, but not as nice as I was hoping for. Okay, so I just had it on the lathe. I cleaned up the center hole. I couldn't do the outer ring because this setup I was using here is not, or I did not have it set very concentric. On the outer ring here, the thickest part here is a millimeter wider or thicker than this part over here. So with this in the lathe, it was really, not centered. The center part was close enough. I could true up the center part, put a hole in it. The rest of it, I'm just going to have to spend some time with some sandpaper to make it look halfway decent. But for what it is, once it's installed, and I think it'll be perfectly fine. All right, so the next detail I want to work on is this piece. So this mounts to the main part I'm working on. So 2 round parts into a square part, and there's 3 little details in there that I'm just going to try again with the rotary table. I'm not going to worry about getting the detail exactly perfect per the kit. I'm just going to mill in 3 little things and see how it looks. Like I said, I'm not too worried about exactness. So yeah, we'll just see how it goes. Close enough to me. I'm going to put it back in the lathe and put a hole in the middle like not all the way through, but maybe like halfway through, just to add some more detail. And again, it's not just like the kit part, but it does add some detail to that. And that's all I was going after. So to me, that is good enough. So I just got to make one more of those, and then an aluminum block to put those into. And then that'll get bolted or screwed and glued to the main thing I'm working on. Okay, so if we take a look at this, again, the kit piece had a little bit of shape to it. I tried annealing it to bend it, but basically what I ended up doing was I just filed in here and rounded here, and then I filed in here, so we kind of have that shape, which is really close to the kit part. And again, it's one of those things that nobody would ever really notice, I'm sure. But if we take a look at this side of it, as you saw before, I made this. This is after I've kind of sanded it and gone over it with some steel wool. And I drilled and tapped a hole in the middle, so that will get screwed and bonded on there. And on the kit part, on the other side, you've got that detail like that, and a smaller little detail right there. So for this piece, you already saw me make these. They were just turned to brass on the lathe and then put on the mill to make a little design on it. And then I just milled out this block of aluminum. I didn't record it, just a simple block. Came down 3 millimeters, put some angles in it, bored some holes. So these will now kind of press right into there. They're a little looser than I wanted, but they'll be fine. I'm going to assemble everything with JB Weld. So I'll get some JB Weld on those and get those put in there. And notice I drilled and counterbored some holes for some bolts like that. And that will get bolted on the other side right there. That'll get bolted on right there. That one's a little bit tight. That'll press in. So that'll press in place there. But that'll get bolted on to that point right there. And the other little detail that's right there. I'm not really into model trains, but somehow I ended up with a box full of model train parts. And this is half of, I'm not even sure what it's called, a receiver, a hitch, or whatever. This is part of the thing that connects two train cars together. And that is almost the exact right scale size. It's not the right pattern, but that doesn't bother me at all. That'll get bonded or JB welded. So that gets bolted on there, and that will get bonded or JB welded on pretty much like right there. And using pieces from other models and other things is perfectly in the spirit of Star Wars models. So using a piece like this from another thing, like I said, that's perfectly in line with what they did building the original models, Star Wars models. So I got no problem putting that on there instead of making my own little thing like that. So I think that'll look perfectly fine. So basically what I'm going to do is mix up some JB Weld and get this stuff all assembled, and then I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so just a reminder, here's what the kit part looks like that. And here is this one all screwed and glued together. So I also took off the rods so I can drill the holes. You'll notice on the kit part, there's 3 holes all along here. Well, the first 2, this one and this one, or the first one on each side, is for mounting this piece. And then the other 2, those 2 here and those 2 here, are for mounting the little flight control stuff. So I drilled and threaded the 2 on the top here, and then the 1 on the bottom here. And you'll notice I got this little end piece, and that end piece is basically like a little plug that I just turned down on the lathe. and all 3 holes go through that, and all 3 holes are threaded for a 440, and then the end just kind of filed roundish. And then that makes the point here. And then this mounts on here. All right, for some reason that one is not going in all the way. I'm going to have to take it back apart and check the threads. That one went down fine. So I got to look at this one. Now, as you can see, the way it is now, it can still do this, which obviously isn't good. But when the centerpiece right here, when I make that and put it in, that'll take care of that. Now, you'll notice on the kit piece, there's this crossbar here. I don't know if that should go on here. I think they just put that on the kit to give some strength here until you can build it, maybe. I don't know. I'm not going to add this in here. I think it'd look better without it. So I'm not going to put this up here. But this is what it's looking like so far with that. Now you'll notice that one of the holes started to come through right there. That doesn't bother me too much. I can fill that in with something. Or just drill it through on both sides. Either way, I think it would be okay. But the next thing I want to work on, I think, is going to be the airfoils on the front. So let's take a look at those kit parts. Okay, so the first 2 pieces we need are this one and this one. Now these fit together like that. And I just figured out I was wrong about those holes. I thought those 2 holes were for the bottom airfoil, or but it's actually the last hole, the 3rd hole here, is for mounting this, and those 2 are used for mounting this airfoil like that. So that first hole actually does have to go all the way through. So yeah, that's good for that, because that hole, I'm going to have to drill that hole all the way through. So yeah, that's good. That makes things a little bit easier. Okay, so here's kind of my thought process for this. It looks to me like that little piece right there is like a little bell crank, and this is a control rod. So this is supposed to move back and forth, pivoting at that point. So I'm going to make those pieces separate, as separate pieces. So to make the rest of this, I decided to do it as 3 separate pieces. I'm going to make a little square block here. I'm going to make the bowling pin thing here. And then these pieces will be one part. So starting with the easy one first, the center block, I basically just kind of sketched it out here, giving the dimensions as 3 times bigger. And I found an aluminum block that will give me those dimensions. Now you'll notice I have a little step put into here, and that's because this V piece, I'm going to have kind of notch into the square block and then hold that in with a couple of screws. Also, the bowling pin piece, I bore a hole in here, and then the bowling pin piece will press into that hole. So that piece will press into that hole. So these are the dimensions for the bowling pin. I don't know what that is. I'm sure there's some reference online somewhere that says that it's a rangefinder or a radar or sonar or something. It's some kind of sensor, I'm sure. But these are the dimensions for that. And I found a chunk of aluminum that will give me the dimensions for this. But yeah, so that is that piece that will get pressed into that piece. And then the pieces here, that V piece, be shaped like that. And I just happened to find a chunk of aluminum, some kind of a bracket. Really don't remember what this was from. This is why I save everything, because this is the perfect thickness. It's maybe half a millimeter thick. I wanted it 6 millimeters thick. This is like 6.5, I think. But that's the basic shape that I need to cut out. And there will be a hole, one here and one here, to mount it to the rails here. And of course, a couple of screws go in here. That will then, remember, this block will have a notch in it, and that'll bolt onto that block. So those are the three basic pieces. And I'll start with the easy one first. I'll start with that one first, and then that one, and then that one, and then we'll get them all screwed and glued together, and we'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so here's that block off the milling machine, and again, that's this one here. Got the hole, got the step, got it milled to size. This is not the aluminum block I started with. That first block you saw was some kind of weird junk gummy aluminum that did not want to machine very well. So I got rid of that and I got a different chunk. So this now, once I get that shape cut out, that's how that's going to go. And that'll get probably a couple of 440 screws or 632 screws or something to hold that together like that. And then of course the hole is for the bowling pin piece to go in, which is here. And I changed things a little bit, made a few minor little changes. But let's take a look at that piece in the lathe. And this is what it's looking like so far in the lathe. So what I did was, first off, I turned the end down to have a good grip in the chuck. And then I turned the whole thing down to the most outer diameter, which is the 21 millimeters. And then I faced off the end, and I set the lathe DRO y-axis to 0, so I could then move over, move over 19.74 millimeters, and then I turned that end down to 17.25, which is what this is. So that stepped down part there will become that shape right there. So I'm basically doing all the features on this end and moving my way over. I don't want to start turning this down while I'm working here, because then I'll lose rigidity. So, because I don't have any tail support. And so just working here, working my way over. Okay, here's what it's looking like so far. I was going to show it to you before I did all of this in here, but I was kind of afraid I would get demonetized. But anyways, I got the taper cut in here, and the way I did that was I reinstalled the cross slide here. And so looking at the dimensions, I did some quick math and figured out it was I needed 10.25 degrees. And when I say I did quick math, I meant I went on Google and I looked up angle calculator and I put the numbers in, and it told me 10.25 degrees. So I put that at just a hair over 10 degrees, and that gave me exactly what I want here. This diameter is 14 millimeters. That diameter in there is 7 millimeters. The outer diameters here are all perfect. All of my dimensions are within just a couple of tenths of a millimeter. The only thing, it doesn't look right. Definitely this curve back here is wrong. I need to work on that a bit. And I think this is a little bit too rounded. If you look at the kit part, the point, it's not as round. This area here should be flatter. So I need to take some of that curve out of it here, bring it down more to a point, less curvy, and that just needs to be done more. This is what I struggle with, because I'm always afraid I'm going to take too much off, because if you take off too much, it's hard to put it back on. So I need to work on this to get the shape more like this, and then I can put in the step here that will then push into the other block that I did earlier. So let me do some more work on this, and hopefully I can get it looking right. I mean, it's not terrible. It's not terrible the way it is now, but it's not
quite exactly right. So yeah, I need to do some more work there. So let me do that and I'll get back with you when I think it's good enough.
Okay, I've been working on these parts. This is the one that you saw before where it was just drawn on the piece of material. I had to thin it down a little bit, and basically I cut out the square that was drawn on. I established the height here to here and the width here to here. And then I went in with the end mill and I got the inside edge here and here, machined across and then up. And then basically just went to the bandsaw and cut off into the angles. Now, while it was still a square, I found the points of the holes, and you'll notice they're not on center. And I probably could have got them on center if I would have planned a little bit more carefully. But even the kit parts, they're not, they're better than mine are, but they're not perfectly on center. But those two holes, it goes that way, those two holes had to match with those two holes here because it gets screwed on right here. And I was measuring the front to back spacing, so I could have moved the whole thing down a little bit, or forward, I guess, and that would have brought the holes more towards center, but then some of the dimensions would have been off a tiny bit. That really doesn't bother me. I went in with an end mill and I machined out the pockets there just to give it some shape and some detail and some depth. I still need to round over those corners, and I also need to go over all the edges with a file and just knock off all the sharp edges with a file and sand it. And this piece, this is the that part off the lathe. I took some off of the front here so it wasn't so roundy. Same thing back here. I like the shape a lot better. I'm not in love with the shape of it, but I like the shape of it. But then there's this block, and so that goes in there, and then that will get, eventually, I need to drill 2 holes here and into here to thread them, so that will get bolted on like that. And you'll notice I knocked those corners off because I kind of screwed up and milled that pocket under the corner. So I had to cut the corners off. But I actually like that better. I think it looks less blocky. I know that's not, how the kit is, but I think it looks less square and blocky. And so now, let's take a look at that piece. And so I sketched it out, and just measuring, the overall length and height, I cut out an aluminum block at the right thickness and just started whittling away on it at the milling machine, and that's what I've got there. Basically, I started off with the angles here on each end. I figured out that was a 45-degree angle. Best I could tell from the plastic part. But that made it easy because then all I had to do was put that aluminum block in the mill on a 45-degree angle, and then I could just mill down and get that flat. And then I could come in and do the edge here and the edge here. So that's what I did right here. And at that point, I flipped the whole thing over and just copied all of those DRO measurements in that order. And so that way I was guaranteed to have 2 identical ends. And because that's the part that matters here, having those 2 the same and at the exact same angle. Also, what's critical is the hole in the middle there has to be centered, and the half circle here has to be centered. And so that was the next thing I located, was those 2 features. And then I cut off the angles and then put it in the milling machine and just milled it to the lines. And then I decked it off, or I end milled it down to get the thickness that I wanted here. And then I came in with the end mill. I set it up like that, ran the end mill down each side, flipped it, ran the end mill down this way, and that gave me those nice radiuses right in there. And this, again, it still needs a file run over all of those square corners just to put a slight chamfer on everything and sand it so it'll be good for paint a little bit later. But I am actually, and obviously I drilled a hole there for a screw. I need to thread that still. But this is the pivot point for the main airfoils. And then this gets mounted just like that. So I still need to locate, drill, and tap a hole here for that to get screwed on just like that. And then this, again, gets bolted onto here. So there's that whole assembly right there. But again, I still need to spend quite a bit of time with the file on all of the sharp corners, go over the whole thing with some sandpaper, and then finally glue it and screw it together. And then that assembly will pretty much be done. The next thing that I wanted to work on, if we take a look at that piece here, we have a little bell crank and a rod, of course, on each end. So taking the dimensions of those bell cranks, I turned out or milled down a couple of these. It's got a slight taper. Again, this is just right off the mill. I still have to round all the corners with the file, still have to take the sharp edges off. And the control rods, I'm going to make those out of brass just because I have some that's pretty much the right diameter that I need. And I was playing around with the ends. On this one, on the lathe, I turned it down to kind of a ball shape. And then on the milling machine, I bored that down so that screw would go in and kind of countersink the head. So kind of simulates a ball end, but it's not a ball end. I mean, obviously it can pivot this way, but that's about it. And that was my original plan, but I don't like it. I mean, I think it looks okay. So I went with ball ends like this. And basically that's just screwed on, drilled in and tapped each piece, and that just screws together. And just kind of turned it down a little bit to give it a little bit of shape, I guess. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut that off and just do that again with that other end. And to connect this, because that's going to get connected there, to connect that, if we take a look at this other one, on the other one, I counter bored in for the screw head. Again, as I keep saying, I need to round the corners off of the file. So, you know, these parts obviously aren't done yet. And I threaded the ball for that screw. So that ball is screwed on there. Obviously, those screw heads will get cut off flush. And then I can take that plastic piece, and that will snap on there. So there's that. So now that's an actual ball joint. And I like that better because, again, once those threads are cut off, that's about as streamlined as I can get. You know, I didn't want a big screw head on one side and a nut on the other side. Of course, I could have threaded this, but then the screw head would be on this side. So by doing it that way, again, just imagine that cut off. That's about as streamlined as I can get. So that's what I'm going to do. So yeah, I will cut that off and do the same thing I did there. And of course, I have two rods. All right, so I glued that piece on just so I could see it better. But that is it right here. All JB welded and screwed together. I just put one screw right there, goes through into that piece. That's pretty much just there in case the JB weld breaks. You know, somebody dropped it or bumped it. I wouldn't want this to kind of break loose. So that'll just hold that in place. And then this piece here, again, JB welded and one screw right there. And that is that. So I think that came out pretty good. I'm actually pretty proud of that. And then, of course, you've got these that I showed earlier, but I don't remember if I showed them rounded off or not. But that screws on right there. So I got the pivot link there. And then, of course, the two rods there, those are for those pieces there. The next thing that we need to work on are the actual airfoils. So we have two like this. So I sketched one out, took some rough measurements for the blank, and so there's just the blank. Now this is actually two pieces glued together, and if you put masking tape on each side and then super glue and then put them together, it makes it a lot easier to peel apart, and then you don't have to clean up all the glue on the part when you're done. So I got that all marked out and sketched out. The next step is to rough cut that on the bandsaw, knock those corners off on the bandsaw, and then put it in the milling machine and mill to the line, and that'll just be done with a file. And then for the other piece, again, same thing, two pieces glued together, and I went ahead and drilled the holes. You'll notice there's 2 points. One is a pivot point and one is for the link rod. So I went ahead and drilled 2 holes. Those are smaller than they need to be. I'm not sure yet what size screw I'll use for that, but that hole is smaller than any screw I would use. But that's just to get the 2 holes there. And again, the 2 pieces glued together, so they will be completely symmetrical left to right. So again, next step for this, take it to the bandsaw, knock that off here, and that here, and then put it in the milling machine, mill that to the line, mill that to the line, and then hand file that curve. So once these are cut out and milled to shape, we'll then separate them. But these actually kind of have more of an airfoil to it. They kind of curve in a little bit, you know, not very much, but a little bit. But they also have that tab here. Obviously, I didn't make it on that. That bracket, which screws it to the frame, I'll make that out of a separate piece. So I'll have just a short little elbow or an angle piece that I'll screw to this, and then that'll get screwed onto here. And unfortunately, it's not a 90-degree angle. It's maybe a 60. I don't know. So I'll have to figure out what that angle is and make a piece to put on there. But yeah, next step, let me get these cut out into shape, and then we'll figure out that little bracket there. All right, for those, milled in the pocket on either side for the little angle piece. So this is ready to be split apart. I just need to drive a razor blade in there or soak it in acetone to break those apart. And those are pretty much done, other than filing a very slight curvature to it, just to kind of give it a hint of an airfoil shape. This one, I do need to go in a little bit more of an arc. I just kind of remeasured the kit piece, and I need to kind of pull that arc in to where that line is just a little bit. So I'll do that before I break those apart. Now the angle piece, like I said, I was going to do that as a separate piece. Well, that was this, or that is this. And so again, I just took some measurements, got the angle there. Well, I didn't write it down, but it's 120 inside, 60 outside, and that was just found using this. And so what I did then, I have a few of these just cut off pieces of aluminum, and length is pretty much right what I want. So basically what I did was cut that piece out of one of those. So I just sharpied up that end and scribed that shape with those measurements, and you can see how that was milled out. So that was pretty much like that. So all of that got milled away, which left me with this. This leg is 2 millimeters, that leg is 3 millimeters. That leg here, the 2 millimeter leg, is what's going to go into that pocket. Now the pocket was only 1.5 millimeters, so there is a little bit sticking out here. But what I didn't want a big step, but I didn't want to take that all the way flush, because then that would have been really thin. So I kind of compromised and did kind of a half and half, half recessed and half sticking out. So that'll be that. And then the 3 millimeter end is what's going to screw onto the arms there. So this needs to be cut in half. So the next step is to cut that in half, so one for each side, and then file the corners so they fit in the radiuses here, and then JB weld them in place. I'll split those apart first. All right, so I am test fitting the airfoil pieces here, and I've got those attached. You'll notice I've got some countersunk screws that are attaching this to that bracket. And again, they were JB welded on first, and then the screws put in. And so I've got those on. That screw there just threads right into the rod. And you can see the tail of the bolt from the bottom there. That goes straight through everything and then threads into this one. So far, I'm really liking that. I'm really happy with the way this is turning out. Looking pretty good, pretty cool. And then I went to put this on, and yeah, it's interfering with these brackets here. When you look at the kit parts, when you put this on the kit part, you can see that that arm is forward of that hole, which is where that airfoil goes on, like that. So you can see the arm is actually just in front of that bracket for the airfoil. And on mine, it's a little bit longer. When you put that on, the arm does go in front of the bolt hole, but I made my bracket here a little bit longer than the scale piece. So I think what I'm going to do, actually what I have to do, I'm pretty sure it's my only option, is to come in here and cut some of that away like this. And I'll do the same back here as well. So that'll make that bracket a little more streamlined, I guess, less chunky, less bulky, and that should then get that out of the way of that piece, I hope. So so yeah, it should work. So I got to take these back off and get them in the mill and take some material away so that I can put that on, and then we can put the other ones on. So I'll get back to you as soon as I got that fitting better. Okay, I finally got this to fit. I removed some material around here, and then that finally allowed this. Obviously, I test fitted one of those on there, but that allows that to now sit in here and exactly where it needs to be. So again, as you can see, I test fitted this one on, and you can see the movement of it like that, which I think is pretty cool. And so got that arm on like so, just pivoting about the point there. And here's the other one with the little link rod screwed onto it there. And that's the little screw. Now I counterbored for the screw head, and then I filed the head flat flush with the surface here. And you'll notice two holes that I drilled here and here. When you look at the kit part, there's two little details right there, and I looked at reference photos, and that's part of it. They're on there. So two round things sticking up, and it's kind of hard to tell here, but there's like a little triangle detail that's raised from the round parts. So I need to make a round thing with a triangle thing sticking up from it, and for scale, they would be about 7 millimeters in diameter. And I think I'm going to make those out of brass, and I just put the holes there to locate them where they're going to go. Not sure if I'm going to screw them from the backside or just JB weld them on. Not really sure. Haven't figured that out yet. Those will probably be done on a next video. I'm thinking this one's already getting to be way too long. But I just wanted to show you this part of it, the screw to hold that piece on, and also what that looks like mounted, and that I got this fixed so it all fits. So what I'm going to do now is put this one on, put the bolts in, get this part done, and then I'll show you what it looks like with it all together, and then that'll wrap up this video. So I'll get back to you here in just a moment. Okay, so there's that front end all put together. And if you notice, like right now, the way that moves, like this, I'm still debating on if I want to have that move with something down here, like the bell cranks or the handlebars. Again, I did drill through those rods just in case I needed to put a push-pull tube or a torque tube in the center of that to come out to these bell cranks.
But I'm kind of thinking right now, I'm leaning towards not doing that. I think I'm just leaning towards leaving it to where you could pose it or move it the way you want to here, and then have everything else back here do its own thing. Because to connect this to something back here would require a lot more like bell cranks and push-pull rods that would just make this area a whole lot busier. And I like the amount of busyness that's here already. I don't want to really add any more because I don't want to make this front end busier than it already is. So I was actually debating on just leaving these solid, stationary, but I think it's okay to have those move because it's kind of cool to see that linkage. You know, it's kind of cool to see all that linkage there move. So I think I'll leave it like that until I take it apart for final finish sanding. I'm going to call this part done. The next thing I'm going to work on with this is that area right here. I want to get that part right there, and the bell cranks that go here. I want to get those done. I'm thinking right now this video is probably way too long, but I appreciate all of you who watched to the end. But until next time, as always, thanks for watching.